Hey, good morning. Once again, it's good to see everybody here. We are going to be picking up in our study as we've been going verse by verse through the New Testament, but more specifically in the book of 1 Corinthians. And we now find ourselves in chapter 4 of 1 Corinthians. And although we find ourselves in a new chapter, we're still kind of going to be discussing some things that the Apostle Paul has been talking about for the past 3 chapters beforehand. And that is this idea of people attaching themselves to particular teachers, and in doing so wanting to acquire some type of worldly wisdom, and out of that elevate themselves over other Christians, which resulted in this splintering, these factions within the church, this division in the church, and it became a really big issue there at the church at Corinth. And again, the Apostle Paul is spending a lot of time on this one issue, wanting to really impress on their minds, just how far off that type of attitude is. And so we've been in this section for 2 months now. Time and time again, we're just talking about the same things. But this is a very important thing because it's human nature to want to elevate people, attach ourselves to them, or we ourselves elevate ourselves and try to amass our own little group and try to elevate ourselves there. So this applies to the church at Corinth, but it also applies to us as well. But we look at the end of chapter 3, we saw that the Apostle Paul was saying, look, you want to elevate us as the apostles, Paul, Apollos, these ministers, you want to elevate them. But he kind of concluded chapter 3 by saying, look, we're here for you. Like, we are gifts to the church for your building up, for your edification. All things are for you. Even the whole world really is there to support and cultivate and create an environment in which God's church can grow and flourish and make an impact. And so chapter 4 and verse 1 is going to kind of be based off of that, or flow out of that. And he's going to kind of give a somewhat concluding statement, even though it's found at the beginning of chapter 4. He's going to kind of conclude a little bit what he had said in chapter 3 when he says, let a man consider us in this manner, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. And that's really what he was trying to impress on them in chapter 3. When you go back to verse 5 of chapter 3, he said, what then is Apollos and what is Paul? Servants through whom you believe, even as the Lord gave to each one. He goes to talk about, how they were stewards of what they were called to do. Paul came and planted the church. Apollos came behind and watered the church. But God was giving the increase. And now in chapter 4, he's saying, okay, so consider us in the right way, in this manner, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. And it's not just important for the church at Corinth to view the apostles that way. It's not just important for us to view the apostles that way. But we also need to view ourselves this way as well. We need to consider ourselves in this manner, to realize that we are these two things, servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. And to have the proper understanding there. By servants of Christ, the Apostle Paul was basically saying, look, we are subordinates to Christ. Don't make us equal to Christ. Definitely don't elevate us above Christ and identify with us as opposed to identifying with Christ. We are servants of Christ. We are subordinates to him. The actual Greek word, you break it down, just means an under rower, like a person who's one of the rowers in the boat, in the ship. You're like under the rowers of the people who row the ship. Now, the word was used more broadly than that, and it was used more as a term to mean that this is a subordinate of someone higher who kind of operates on the behalf of that person above them. It's a little different word for servants than what Paul typically uses. But the idea there is he's impressing upon them, look, we are subordinates to Christ. We are servants of Christ. We are under rowers. We're under Christ, just serving Christ and doing his will and fulfilling his purpose. And then we are stewards of the mysteries of God, in that we didn't come up with it ourselves. Like, it's not like we sat down and came up with these mysteries and then now we're sharing them with you. We're just stewards. They were given to us and we're handing them down to you. We're trying to be good stewards of them, making sure that they are articulated properly and accurately and in accordance with the truth, We're trying to get it out there to as many people as possible, as was opposed with the pagan religions where you had the mysteries and you kept them concealed from the masses. Only a few people could have it. The apostles had the mysteries of God revealed to them, and then they wanted to tell as many people as possible about it. Like they were stewards of it in the sense that they were to go out and spread it to as many people as possible. And so they were mere servants of Christ, subordinates to Christ. They were mere stewards of what Christ had basically entrusted to them. And that's how he wanted them to view them. But we should view ourselves the same way. We should view ourselves as servants of Christ, subordinates of Christ. And you say, well, obviously we think of ourselves that way, but practically we have to ask ourselves, how often do we want Christ to be our servant, as opposed to how much we willingly and intentionally offer ourselves to be the servant of Christ? Is our relationship with Christ one-sided to where we want all the forgiveness of sins that Jesus supplies us through the blood? We want all the position that comes before God through Jesus Christ. And then our whole lives is really just about how can Christ serve me, make my life more comfortable? How can he set me up better in life? And our prayers are more geared towards how can I get things my way, in the way that I want them to work out? And how can I get Christ in line with my will? I already know how things should work out, so now I just need to pray and get God in tune with how I think things should go. Do we view Christ as our servant, or do we really see ourselves as servants of Christ? It's got to go both ways. Yes, Christ came to serve. He came to offer his life as a ransom for many, as he tells us in the Gospel of Mark. But that's not all that he's there for. He's also there to direct us so that we can go out and be his hands and feet, to go out and serve others, and to take that example to go out and serve, so that he would say the first would be last, the last would be first. He who wants to be greatest of all must be servant of all, he tells us. And so we need to view ourselves as servants of Christ. In other words, it's not about me, it's not about my will, it's not about how I think things should be ran or how I think my life should go necessarily. It's all about Christ. How can I get my will under the will of Christ and serve him in that way? That doesn't mean we can't bring our petitions to him when we have heartaches, when we have difficulties, when there's bumps in the road, and we definitely want to lean on the Lord, cast our anxieties upon him. I'm not saying that we don't ask him for his help and assistance, but if that's all we limit our relationship with Christ to, then the relationship is one-sided. Yes, ask the Lord for help, but at the same thing, say, Lord, here I am, send me. I'll be the one to go out and do your work. Just point me in the right direction. Having that type of attitude. And so we have to say, how much of my life is spent serving Christ, and how much of my life is spent trying to get Christ to serve me in primarily. So sometimes he has work for us to do. And do we have that disposition in heart that says, yes, I'm ready to go? And one thing we have to be clear about is, when we talk about this, being servants of Christ, being diligent workers in the kingdom, it doesn't mean that every second of every day has to be filled with doing some type of work for the kingdom. What it means is, with this attitude that we have, it means that we're always postured to do it. In other words, right now the Lord might have us resting, the Lord might have us growing, he might have us learning, and he might be training us for other things. We might be in a period of our lives where we're not necessarily actively doing something yet. But when he does say, hey, it's time to go, we say, I'm gone. I'm ready to serve you, Lord, whatever you want me to do. Just having that posture of heart of always being ready to serve. Sometimes he may not have anything in our immediate, in the immediate time frame that we need to do, but we always are prepared in case he does call us to that work. But anyways, we view ourselves as servants of Christ, as Paul and his companions did, but we should also see ourselves as stewards. Now we could say stewards specifically what he's talking about. We've been stewards of the mysteries of God. Not that we receive direct revelations, but that we have the Word of God, where he's written these things down. The Apostle Paul had written them. Others had written them down. In Ephesians chapter 3, here the Apostle Paul is talking about the mystery of the church, how the Jews and the Gentiles would be brought together into one new man, that the wall of partition, the law of commandments was broken down so that Jews and Gentiles could become one. And He says, starting in verse 1, he says, "For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus, on behalf of you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace, which was given to me for you," there's that word stewardship, "that by revelation there was made known to me the mystery, as I wrote before in brief." Now listen to this in verse 4, "about which when you read, you can understand my insight into the mystery of Christ." So as we read what the Apostle Paul wrote about the mysteries of God, we can understand them and we can have them for ourselves. And then we in turn become stewards of these mysteries, and that we've learned about them through the revelation given to us in God's word. And so we become stewards of it in that we take in these mysteries of God, these truths of God into our hearts. We allow them to have their full effect in our lives practically as we apply them to our lives, but at the same time ready to share them when the opportunity presents itself. So that would be more specific ways I'm at, but I'd also like expand that principle a little bit as well to include anything that God has gifted us with or has imparted to us that we are to steward. That we are to steward. In other words, it could be a gift, a talent, a calling that God has imparted to us that we become mere stewards of. And we need to view ourselves as that. Even our money. We should say, this isn't really my money. I'm just a steward of the money that God has given me. I'm blessed. I'm thankful that God has given me the money, but I don't hold on to it as though this is my money and no one can tear it out of my grasp or anything like that. No, the money that we have in the bank account is from God. We should be willing to distribute to others, but that goes along with gifts and talents that we have. Anything that God has brought into our lives that can be used for the benefit of others, we're stewards of that, and God entrusts that to us to benefit others and to, of course, further His kingdom and glorify Him. We shouldn't see it as, well, this is mine. I acquired this, or I somehow am ruler of myself and able to do this on my own. He's going to say it in a minute, or further down the chapter in verse 7, he says, "What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as if you had not received it?" So don't be boasting. Don't think that it all comes from you. We are all mere stewards of everything God has given us. Even our very life is really given to us by God. And we are just here to steward that and to use that for His glory. So as Paul wanted him and Apollos and others to be viewed, we should also view ourselves in the same way. We are servants of Christ and stewards of God, stewards of what God has entrusted to us. But then he goes on and he's going to kind of dig in deeper in this idea of stewardship. He says, "In this case, moreover, it is required of stewards that one be found faithful." All right, so he's kind of conceding the point a little bit that, yes, it is good for a person to be faithful in anticipating some response that the church at Corinth might have. They might say, "Yeah, Paul, we understand you're just a servant. We understand that, you're just a steward of the mysteries of God, but you are a faithful one. Like you are right on, Paul, and you're so much better than everyone else. That's why we want to attach to you. That's why we want to follow you and identify with you. Like, we want to elevate you because even though you are just a steward, you're a real good one. And we want to follow that and identify with that." And so he's saying that, yes, it's good to be a faithful steward. He's saying, I'm not going to deny that. It is definitely good to be a faithful steward. Obviously, we all know that. Let's say maybe you're going out of town for the week and you had someone house sit for you. You'd want someone to be faithful in that. When you came home at the end of the week, you'd want at least everything to be like it was when you left. And much better if you come back and it's better than it was when you left, cleaner than it was when you left. That would be a faithful steward. That'd be a person who you entrusted your home to, you entrusted your possessions, your goods to, and they were faithful. An unfaithful person would be one that you come back and everything's turned upside down, they've stolen things from you, that'd be an unfaithful. Of course, we all know that, it's good to have a faithful steward. What the Apostle Paul is about to argue, though, is who is it that has the right to tell us whether we're faithful or not? Is our faithfulness based on human judgment and human opinions? Or is it based on something deeper, or perhaps we could say higher than human opinion? So he's saying, yes, it's good to be a faithful steward. You guys at this moment are recognizing me as a faithful steward and wanting to elevate me in that. But, he says in verse 3, but to me it's a very small thing not be examined by you or by any human court. He says, maybe you guys do consider me as faithful, but I consider that a small thing. I don't think he's being, rude or anything like that. He's just saying that in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small thing to be judged by you guys in this way. What's very interesting about this is in 1 Corinthians, in the book or the letter of 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul is trying to downplay his apostleship. But we're going to go one book over in the New Testament to 2 Corinthians, and we're going to find him actually defending his apostleship. So we're going to find the church at Corinth here trying to elevate him, trying to identify with him, trying to separate themselves and elevate themselves with their connection with Paul in this letter. But the next letter, Paul's going to be like, oh, you guys have put me in this real awkward position. Now I got to defend my apostleship. I don't like boasting in myself. I don't like talking about the accomplishments that I have, but you guys have kind of twisted my arm. Now I have to do this to show you, yes, I am a legitimate apostle. And so the whole thing's going to shift. So we can see now why the Apostle Paul would say, it's a small thing that would be examined by you, because we all know how fickle people can be and how they can sway back and forth. Sometimes it can be the same person, but going from one person to another person, opinions change, ideas change. One day people love what you're doing, they think it's the greatest thing on earth. The next day they despise what you're doing and think that you jumped off the deep end or something like that. And so don't put too much weight on being examined by people. The Apostle Paul would say it's just a small thing to be examined by you. And this is an important thing for us to realize, because if we allow our service to God to be driven by the opinions of others, we're always going to be hitting bumps. We're always going to be starting and stopping. We're going to be in a state of paralysis oftentimes, because maybe people are launching criticisms at us, and it will impede us from being able to jump forward completely into what God is calling us to do. And we'll be hindered by that because we're so concerned about what people are thinking. Or we might become elevated in ourselves, as people do maybe consider us as faithful servants of Christ, and we begin to think too highly of ourselves and begin to make things all about us instead of about Christ, and the attention now comes upon us. This can have really dangerous effects. So it's very important for us to, yes, take compliments generously. Yes, listen to even helpful feedback that we get, but don't put too much stock into it. Don't make our whole service about trying to either please others or appease others. We just do what God has called us to do, and that's where we find our focus. And he goes even further. He says, it's a small thing that I would be examined by you, that is you, your church at Corinth. And he says, or by any human court. In other words, it would even be a small thing for me to be examined by people who are professional examiners or professional judges, people who actually do that for a living. That would still be a small thing. Not only among you, there's common folk. A lot of them were common laborers. We found out in chapter 1 there wasn't a whole lot who were wise and lofty that were called into the church. But he says, not only with you guys, but even if a human court with professional judges were to put me on trial, it would still be a small thing. But then he goes even further. He says, in fact, I do not even examine myself. I don't even examine myself. We can understand why he might think it a small thing for other people to examine him. Because he could say, well, you guys don't have all the facts. You don't have all the information available. You don't really know what's in my heart. You don't understand my motives behind this. So I can understand why you would misjudge what I got going on here. But he says, even myself, the one who is intimately involved in the work, the one who does know my thoughts and my mind and my heart, even myself, I don't examine. That's how much he said that human opinion doesn't matter. You can't even oftentimes accurately assess your own work when you're doing the work of the Lord. I'm reminded of when Jesus talked about a group of people that would come to him at his second coming, and they would say to him, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out the demons, and in your name do many wonderful works? And what does the Lord say to them? Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. In their minds, because of the great things they had done, they thought, yeah, definitely we're a shoo-in to enter into eternal glory. But they were harboring sin. They were living a double life. They weren't truly dedicated to the cause. They were doing great things, but they had these hidden sins and stuff. And the Lord says, even though you think you're a shoo-in, actually, I don't even know you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. And so we might assess ourselves as great. We might think of the great things we've done. We might think of all the great accomplishments that we have for the sake of the kingdom. All the while, the Lord's looking at us and saying, But then the opposite is true as well. Sometimes we can be overly critical of ourselves. We can have paralysis by analysis. That is, we nitpick everything that we do. After every conversation, we run it back through our minds saying, how I could have said it better, and I didn't say this, I should have said that. Or we engage in some type of service, and we realize, I wanted to serve this many people, but I was only able to do this many, or whatever. It could be a whole host of things. But we can get to the point where we don't think too well of ourselves as we examine ourselves. We think too critical of ourselves as we're doing the Lord's work. And what that does is it keeps us from really being able to run forward in full force to do God's will, because we're second guessing ourselves. Anyone who's played sports, you realize how bad it is to second guess yourself when you're playing a sport. The quarterback who has the football, if he's just back there saying, well, I want to throw it to him, but I don't know if that's going to work out. I don't know if I'm a really good passer. I don't know if I can make it that far. If he's constantly second guessing himself, he's on the ground. That goes with all soccer or any other sport. I mean, if you're going to go out, you got to go all out, and you can't second guess yourself that much. That doesn't mean you don't, assess the situation and assess yourself and try to adjust and try to do the best you can. I'm not saying that, but when we get overly critical to where we're constantly second guessing ourselves, we can't really dive into the work that we normally could do. And so the Apostle Paul says, it's a small thing that I be judged by you. It's a small thing that I be judged by even professional judges. And it's even a small thing to judge myself. He says in verse 4, for I am conscious of nothing against myself. So, as I do the mental Rolodex in my mind, I can't really think of any outstanding, sins that I have. I think I'm living a pretty good life. I don't have any conscious sins that I'm aware of. Yet, he says, I am not by this acquitted. In other words, it's not like the Lord's going to, at the end, he's going to come to you and say, I don't know, Joey, what do you think how good do you think you were? Do you think you were a good steward? Did you think you had any sins? And then, well, I think I was pretty good. Okay, then I'll go with that. The Lord's not going to ask us how we think we did. He knows how we did. He knows our heart. He knows the situation in and out. He knows everything. And he's not going to ask other people as well. He's not going to go ask you guys' opinions. Hey, what do you think about Joey's preaching? I hope he doesn't ask. No, he might ask, what do you think about Joey's preaching? Well, he's pretty good. He's a pretty faithful minister. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, he must be a faithful minister. Come on, Joey, come on in. The Lord knows. And so even if we acquit ourselves, even if we don't see anything against ourselves, even if everyone else doesn't see anything against us, even though everyone might approve us, or the opposite, even though everyone might criticize us, or we might criticize ourselves, all that doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's the Lord that examines. That's the difference. He says, by this I am not acquitted, but the one who examines me is the Lord. And I don't know about you, but I am so glad it's the Lord that judges me and not other people or even myself or even professional judges. Because why? He's the righteous judge. He's the one who can take in the full picture. He understands us better than we know ourselves. He knows us physiologically, psychologically, sociologically. He knows us inside and out, every aspect of our lives, every point of history in our lives. He knows everything about our lives that even we oftentimes don't even know. And he's going to examine in a good way, in a proper way. He's going to examine it with eyes of mercy and compassion and love. he's going to do it in the right way, and also with justice too, if justice is required. But he's going to be an accurate judge. He's going to be the true judge. He's not going to be one that sways with the wind, not one that one day has this opinion about things, the next day has a different opinion about things. He's the righteous judge. He's the one who is going to examine us. So in verse 5, he says, "Therefore do not go on passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will bring both to light the things hidden in the darkness and make manifest the motives of the hearts. And then each one's praise will come to him from God." In other words, don't go trying to pass judgment too quickly. You don't have all the information. Even, detectives and things will say you don't want to arrest a person until you have all the evidence gathered. And so you have everything, not only circumstantial evidence, but forensic evidence. You want to have a full picture of everything before you go out and make that judgment, make that call. And the Apostle Paul will say, you need to hold off your judgment too, because you don't have all the information. You don't know the hidden things. You don't know the dark things in a person's heart or the dark things in a person's circumstances that you can't see. All you see is a little glimmer, a little glimpse of what's going on in that person's life, but you don't have the full picture. Even a person who you think might be the most awesome, most faithful believer, faithful to the cause of Christ, standing up for the kingdom, you might think that is, the existential, height of what it means to be a Christian. But little do you know, there might be hidden things in their lives where they're doing things you don't even know about. So appreciate those who appear to be faithful, support them. I'm not saying be cynical or anything like that, but don't over elevate them, because you just in your heart don't know. Only the Lord really knows how faithful these stewards are. But at the same time, also hold off being too critical of people before the time, because you may not understand the whole situation in that situation, or in that case as well. So he just says, hold off judgment, okay? Now, if there's blatant things, like Jesus does say, you'll know them by their fruits. Like if someone's just obviously like taking advantage of people, if they're obviously doing things, of course, you need to respond appropriately. But this super analytical type of attitude towards people, it can be destructive, either because you're over elevating people or you're casting people down. Apostle Paul says, just hold on a minute. These things will come to light eventually. And he says, and then each one's praise will come to him from God. Isn't that much better? Don't you think the Apostle Paul would feel much better having his praise come from God than the church at Corinth? As much as he loved the church at Corinth, we can tell by the way he writes, he has a heart for them. He loves them. It's not that he just thinks, well, you guys are worthless, I don't care what you think. He cared about them very much, and that will come out more and more as we go through the letter. But in the end, in comparison to the praise that he could get from God, it is small when you put it in comparison. And so he say, you'd want your praise to come from God. It's very similar to what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, when you're giving your alms, don't let your right hand know what the left hand is doing, because your Father who's in secret, he'll reward you openly. When you pray, go into your closet, and the Lord who sees in secret will reward you openly. Like God knows all the hidden things. He knows all the things that are going on and understands those things, and he's going to reward you. If you're praying and you're just trying to put on a show so that you can get the praise of men, when you give the alms, you're blowing the trumpet so that everyone knows how much you're giving, and you're doing all this as a big show to put on to get the praise of others, you have your reward, but your reward is just the praise of men. But if you do it truly with a sincere heart, you're really dedicated to the Lord, and you don't care about what receiving praise from others, you receive praise from God. He who sees in secret will reward you openly. And so this should be a comforting word for us here this morning. If you're doing the work of the Lord, keep on pressing on. Don't get too big on yourself. Don't get puffed up when people say you're doing a good job and give you a pat on the back. And don't get too deflated when people criticize you and say your work's worthless or anything like that. just stay focused on the Lord. If He's called you to do it, stay in that calling, continue to be dedicated and diligent, and leave all that up to the Lord. He'll sort it out. He'll sort it out in the end. We just have to do what the Lord has called us to do this day. So we consider ourselves as servants of Christ, subordinates of Christ, submissive to His will. We're just stewards over things that have been given to us, not things that we've accomplished on our own. And we just go out in that and leave the rest up to God. And I think we're going to stop there this morning. And it's a little bit early, but there's a transition that's going to take place in verse 6, in which we're going to get into a very practical part. So all the while, the Apostle Paul's been talking about him and Apollos. He's kind of been focusing mostly on them, about their ministry and how you shouldn't elevate them and think too highly of them. But in verse 6, we're going to see a transition where he says, okay, now what does that mean for you guys? If we're not supposed to be highly exalted and puffed up and too highly elevated, the same goes for you too. And you shouldn't be seeking that in your own walk as well. And so since there's going to be that transition, I don't want to just like get a few verses into it and then we stop and run out of time. We're going to, our plan is that we'll go through verse 6 to the end of the chapter next week, where we'll be able to get all this together. Like this is going to be somewhat the summary of all that the Apostle Paul has said so far. And so I want to kind of tackle it all in one chunk. But what we've covered so far, I think, is enough for us to meditate on this upcoming week. Go out and do the work of the Lord. If He's called you to do something, just go out and do it. Submit your will to Him. Recognize that it's Him that we serve and that we need to follow Him in what He calls us to do. Also, just recognize ourselves as steward over things that have been given to us, whether it's our money, our resources, our talents, our gifts, whatever it is. We are given those things for a purpose and for a reason. And He wants us to use those for His glory and for His kingdom. And then just go out. Don't pay too much heed to people who look up to you, want to elevate you. Don't look too much at people who overly criticize you. Just go out and do the work of the Lord. And ultimately, in the end, of course, our goal is to hear those words from our Father, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. And our praise will be from God Himself. If you're here this morning and you want to give your life over to the Lord, maybe you've delayed from coming to the Lord because of the opinions of others. Maybe you feel like, well, if I go to the Lord, then I don't know what my friends are going to think. I don't know what my parents are going to think. It's a small thing. In comparison to the big picture, it's a small thing what they'll think about you. You need to ask yourself, what does the Lord think of me in this moment? Have I had my sins forgiven? Have I placed my faith in Jesus Christ? Have I confessed Him as Lord of my life, as the Son of God? Have I repented of my sins and turned to Him? Have I identified with Him in the waters of baptism? Those are the things that He has expressed as a means by which we can come back to Him and find a restored relationship with Him. And if you'd like to do that this morning, please come forward as we stand and